I savored the perfect silence that fell over Westfield Manor's grand ballroom as my daughter Victoria's face drained of color. The moment when all 70 distinguished guests learned that the embarrassing mother, hidden away in the dusty attic during their elegant soiree, was actually the sole legal owner of the historic estate they were standing in. Some lessons about respecting your elders can't be taught with gentle reminders alone. Before we dive deeper, tell me where you're watching from in the comments. And if this story resonates with you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've got something extra special coming your way. I, Eleanor Grace Winters, was never supposed to have a seat at society's table. Born in 1948 in the struggling mill town of Riverbrook, Connecticut, I entered a world where financial security was something we glimpsed in magazines, not something we experienced in our daily lives. Our neighborhood consisted of modest homes occupied by factory workers, teachers, and shopkeepers. Hardworking people who measured worth not by what they owned, but by the integrity with which they lived their lives and what they built for future generations. My father, Thomas Winters, worked punishing shifts at the Riverbrook paper mill, his hands gradually roughening from the caustic chemicals and scalding steam that would eventually contribute to his early death. He would return home each evening, his clothes carrying the sharp smell of pulp and processing chemicals, his shoulders stooped from hours of monitoring the massive machines that transformed raw wood into the paper that carried the words and images of a world beyond our small town. Despite the physical toll, he never complained. "The work is hard," he'd say, "but it lets me give you children something better than I had." My mother, Catherine, transformed our simple 3-bedroom house on Maple Street into a place where anyone experiencing hardship could find comfort and a hot meal, regardless of their circumstances. She had been a bookkeeper before marrying my father, one of the few women in our town with training beyond high school. Though she gave up formal employment to raise me and my younger brothers William and James, she never stopped being an educator and manager. Our kitchen table was as much a classroom in economics as it was a dining area. "True wealth isn't what's in your wallet," my mother would say, her hands efficiently mending clothes that other families might have discarded. "It's what you understand about how the world works." This philosophy guided our family's approach to everything from household finances to community involvement. While we had little in material terms, we cultivated resourcefulness and foresight with religious dedication. Riverbrook in the 1950s was a town frozen in time, though most of us were too close to see it clearly. The paper mill that had built the community operated much as it had since the 1920s, even as factories in neighboring towns began to modernize. Many families simply lived day to day, paycheck to paycheck, finding comfort in television shows that portrayed an American prosperity that seemed to exist everywhere except our town. Our street, Lincoln Avenue, was lined with nearly identical homes built decades earlier for the mill workers, each with a small patch of yard and a front porch where neighbors gathered on summer evenings. The Pattersons lived to our left. Frank worked alongside my father at the mill while his wife Martha taught 3rd grade at Riverbrook Elementary. The Donovans lived to our right. Joseph drove the delivery truck for Henderson's Grocery, and Alice ran a small seamstress business from their front room. These neighbors formed an extended family of sorts, each household contributing what skills and resources they had to our collective survival. Life in Riverbrook taught me early lessons in economic reality. When I was 8, the mill reduced hours. During a market downturn, cutting everyone to 4-day weeks. I watched as neighbors helped neighbors, trading childcare for home repairs, garden vegetables for knitting lessons. What outsiders might have seen as hardship, we experienced as interdependence, a community adapting together to circumstances beyond individual control. My childhood was shaped by watching my parents plan carefully for the future despite limited means. I observed my mother preserve and can vegetables from our small garden to feed us through winter. In August, our kitchen would transform into a steamy workshop as mason jars filled with tomatoes, green beans, and pickles, each carefully processed, to last until the next growing season. Nothing was wasted. Even apple cores and peels were turned into jelly or vinegar, Waste is just ignorance made visible, my mother would say, as she transformed scraps into usable resources. This practical wisdom shaped my understanding of value long before I encountered formal economic theory. I watched my father repair our home and help neighbors with theirs, teaching me that maintenance and care extended the life of everything. On weekends, when he wasn't working overtime at the mill, he would tackle an endless list of projects: fixing the roof, insulating the attic, rebuilding the back steps. "Fix it right the first time, Ellie," he'd tell me as I handed him tools, "and you won't have to fix it again next year." This lesson in quality over expedience would guide my approach to everything from education to investments throughout my life. In Riverbrook, where resources were scarce, durability wasn't a luxury. It was a necessity. Most importantly, I witnessed how my parents managed the resources they had with disciplined intention rather than impulsive desires. Payday in. Our household followed a ritual that never varied regardless of season or circumstance. At the kitchen table, my mother would carefully divide my father's earnings into labeled envelopes: mortgage, groceries, utilities, church, savings, and education. The education envelope, though often the thinnest, was treated with particular reverence. "This is your future, Ellie, and Will's and Jamie's too," my mother would say, placing $1 or sometimes just coins into the envelope. "It might not look like much today, but over time it will grow into something significant." The consistency of this practice, maintaining the same disciplined allocation during both flush times and lean ones, demonstrated commitment to long-term priorities that transcended immediate circumstances. My parents never framed this as sacrifice, but rather as alignment with their deepest values. This lesson in patience and compounding wasn't just theoretical. Each December, my mother would open the education envelope and show us how the small, weekly contributions had accumulated. Then she would take us to the Riverbrook Savings and Trust to deposit the sum into our college accounts. The teller, Mrs. Davidson, would make a show of counting the money, mostly singles and coins, before updating our passbook with the new balance and calculating the interest earned. "Look at that, Eleanor," Mrs. Davidson would say, pointing to the interest column. "That's money you didn't have to work for. That's your money working for you." The concept of passive income, returns generated without additional labor, fascinated me even before I had language to describe it. While most adults in Riverbrook worked physically demanding jobs where income was directly tied to hours worked, Mrs. Davidson was introducing a fundamentally different economic model where initial resources could multiply themselves through strategic positioning rather than continued effort. By age 10, I had begun seeking opportunities to earn money beyond household chores. I offered to run errands for elderly Mrs. Whitman, who lived 3 doors down, organized books for the church, library, and helped the Pattersons tend their vegetable garden when Mr. Patterson's back pain flared up. These experiences taught me that value creation took many forms, and economic opportunities existed even in resource-constrained environments if you looked carefully enough. By 12, I had established my own system for saving, using old coffee, cans hidden in my closet, one for immediate needs, one for short-term goals, and most importantly, one labeled future that remained untouched even when temptations arose. I earned money babysitting for neighboring families, helping older residents with grocery shopping, and during summer, picking strawberries at Cleary Farm outside town. While other children spent their earnings on records and movies at the Riverbrook Cinema, I divided mine with methodical precision: 25% to immediate for small pleasures like books or ice cream, 25% to soon for larger purchases like a new winter coat or school supplies. 50% always went to future, the untouchable fund that represented possibilities beyond Riverbrook. The discipline required to maintain this system while friends enjoyed immediate gratification sometimes tested my resolve. When the traveling carnival came to Riverbrook during the summer of 1961, I declined joining friends on the rides and games. Knowing the $5 required would deplete my immediate fund completely. Patricia Morgan, whose father managed the local bank, couldn't comprehend my reluctance. "Your parents could just give you more if you run out," she said, confusion evident in her expression. "That's what mine do." "That's not how it works in my family," I replied, unable to fully articulate the fundamental difference in our economic worldviews. At 13, I couldn't explain that her approach assumed abundance and safety nets I knew didn't exist in my reality. "Most folks spend first and save what's left, which usually means saving nothing," my father explained one evening while helping me count my savings. "Smart people save first and spend what remains. It's a small difference that changes everything." I remember looking up from the neat piles of coins on my bedroom floor, struck by the simple wisdom in his words. At 12, I couldn't fully grasp the implications, but something about the principle resonated deeply. It wasn't just about money. It was about priorities, about making deliberate choices rather than falling into default patterns. This simple reversal of conventional behavior became my guiding principle long before I understood its significance. By 14, I had opened my own account at Riverbrook Savings and Trust, separate from the one my parents maintained for my education. Mrs. Davidson, impressed by my regular deposits, gave me a real ledger book to track my balance, interest, and financial goals. "You've got a good head for numbers, Eleanor," she observed after I calculated the compound interest correctly before she could. "You keep this up, and you'll go places most Riverbrook girls only dream about." The winter I turned 15, an opportunity arose that would test my financial principles and expand my understanding of investment. The Henderson family, who owned the local grocery store, announced they were selling their delivery van to purchase a newer model. The asking price was $150, an astronomical sum from my perspective, but I recognized potential value others missed. After careful calculation and research at the town library about vehicle maintenance costs, I approached Mr. Henderson with a proposition. I would pay $100 for the van, nearly all my savings, provided I could use it for a delivery service I wanted to start, bringing groceries to elderly residents or busy families for a small fee. Additionally, I would continue making deliveries for his store at a reduced rate compared to what he would pay a new driver. Mr. Henderson, initially skeptical of my age and lack of driving experience, eventually agreed when my father offered to supervise my driving until I obtained my license the following year. This arrangement, my first significant capital investment, taught me critical lessons about negotiation, operational costs, and the difference between assets and liabilities. The delivery service, which I operated after school and on weekends, generated steady income while providing valuable service to community members with limited mobility. More importantly, it represented tangible evidence that strategic resource allocation could create opportunities invisible to those focused solely on immediate consumption. By 16, while friends were saving for prom dresses or makeup, I had accumulated enough from the delivery service profits to make my first financial investment. Shares in Northeast Telecommunications, a regional company expanding telephone services throughout New England. My father had read about their growth in the business section of the Sunday paper, and we researched the company together at the Riverbrook Public Library. "Communications will only become more important," he noted, his finger tracing the upward trajectory of their quarterly earnings. "People will always need to connect with each other, no matter what else changes." The decision to invest raised eyebrows among my peers who couldn't understand delaying gratification for such a distant, uncertain goal. Patricia Morgan, now dated the quarterback and unofficially crowned as our class's social queen, was particularly vocal about her confusion when she spotted me reading the business section during study hall. "I don't get it, Ellie," she said, perching on the edge of my desk. "You could have the prettiest dress at prom, but instead you bought what? A piece of paper that says you own part of some telephone poles you've never even seen?" I remember smiling at her bewilderment. I don't own the telephone poles, Patricia. I own a small part of what the company produces, now and in the future. The dress would be worn once and then hung in my closet, but this investment keeps working for me even when I'm sleeping. She rolled her eyes, clearly unconvinced, and changed the subject to Richard Bennett asking her to prom. I didn't mind. Even then, I recognized that we were operating with fundamentally different assumptions about what mattered and why. Our modest circumstances meant college wasn't expected for a girl from our neighborhood in the mid-1960s. My brothers were naturally assumed to be college-bound if their grades merited it, but for girls in Riverbrook, the typical path led to marriage, motherhood, or perhaps work as a secretary or nurse if you were particularly ambitious. Neither of my parents had education beyond high school, their schooling cut short by the practical necessity of earning income during difficult times. Yet they spoke of education with reverence and created in me a determination to achieve what they hadn't been able to pursue. Throughout high school, I maintained a meticulous academic record while continuing to build my financial foundation. When my Northeast telecommunications stock increased in value by nearly 50% over 2 years, I reinvested the proceeds in a small, diversified portfolio based on research I conducted at the Riverbrook Public Library. The librarian, Mrs. Whitaker, began setting aside relevant sections from the Wall Street Journal and Business Week for me, recognizing my unusual interest in financial matters. "You should consider studying business or economics in college," she suggested one afternoon as I pored over annual reports. "You have an aptitude that shouldn't go to waste." The possibility of college had always been present in my mind, but Mrs. Whitaker's comment crystallized something important. There were fields of study precisely aligned with my natural interests and abilities. That evening, I borrowed a catalog for the State University from the library's reference section and spent hours analyzing degree programs, course requirements, and career pathways. Throughout my senior year, I applied for every scholarship available, wrote essays for national competitions, and worked multiple jobs to bolster my college fund. My parents contributed what they could, which wasn't much with my father's health beginning to decline from years of exposure to mill chemicals, but their emotional support never wavered. The day I brought home my acceptance letter to the state university, along with my detailed financial plan for attending without burdening my parents, was one of the proudest moments of our family life. My mother sat at our kitchen table, letter in one hand, my financial spreadsheets in the other, silent tears of pride sliding down her cheeks. Those tears, quickly wiped away with a kitchen towel, taught me more about the value of planning than any words could have conveyed. It wasn't just that I had been accepted, it was that I had made it possible through years of small, consistent actions that had accumulated into something transformative. "How did you manage this?" my father asked later that evening, examining the papers showing scholarship funds, campus job arrangements, and the savings I'd accumulated. "I learned from watching you both," I said simply. Small actions over time create possibilities that seem impossible at the start. The summer before college was bittersweet. My father's health continued to deteriorate, the chronic cough becoming more severe despite the medications Dr. Martin prescribed. I worried about leaving home with his condition worsening, but both my parents insisted I not delay my education. Going to college is the best legacy I could ask for," my father said during one of his better days, as we sat on the front porch watching thunderclouds gather over the hills. "Knowing you'll have opportunities I couldn't give your mother, that's worth more than any medicine." I arrived at State University in August 1966, one of the few students from Riverbrook to ever attend college, and certainly the only one who arrived with both an investment portfolio and a comprehensive financial plan for the next 4 years. My roommate, Catherine Hamilton from the affluent suburb of Westlake, was initially confused by my careful budgeting and work schedule at the university library. "Why are you working so hard?" she asked during our first month. "College is supposed to be fun. Your parents should be handling the bills," I tried explaining my background, but the gulf between Riverbrook and Westlake proved difficult to bridge. Catherine's father was a senior partner at a law firm. Her mother had never worked outside their home. The concept of educational funding, being a collective family sacrifice requiring years of preparation, was foreign to her experience. Those university years expanded my understanding of financial systems beyond the practical management I'd observed growing up. Majoring in business administration with a focus on economics, I discovered the architecture of wealth creation. How money could work for you instead of you working for it. How timing affected outcomes. And most importantly, how fundamental principles of disciplined resource management applied equally to household budgets and global corporations. Professor James Lawrence, who taught economic theory, became a particularly important mentor. After I stayed after class, one day to ask detailed questions about market efficiency theories, he invited me to participate in a special research project he ran for his most promising students. "Most undergraduates can't see beyond the next exam," he told me. "You're thinking decades ahead. That's rare and valuable." The research team met weekly in the economics building conference room, where 6 students from various backgrounds analyzed market trends, researched emerging industries, and developed forecasting models. Unlike my other classes, which were predominantly male, this was 1967 after all, the research group had 2 other women, including Rebecca Friedman, who would later become my business partner. While fellow students participated in Vietnam protests and civil rights marches, causes I supported philosophically but engaged with differently, I focused on mastering the tools that would allow me to navigate economic systems effectively. I understood instinctively that meaningful independence required both principled idealism and practical capability, particularly for a woman from my background who couldn't rely on family connections or inherited privilege. My father died during my junior year, his lungs finally surrendering to the damage inflicted by decades of chemical exposure at the mill. I returned to Riverbrook for the funeral, struck by how the town seemed smaller than I remembered, more faded and tired. Nearly everyone at the service worked for the paper mill, and I couldn't help noticing how many of the men coughed just like my father had in his early years. After the service, Mr. Collins, my father's shift supervisor, approached me with an envelope. "Your dad asked me to give you this if anything happened to him," he said, pressing it into my hands. "Said you'd know what to do with it." Inside was my father's life insurance policy, a modest $3,000 sum, along with a handwritten note. "Ellie, this isn't much, but it's what I could do. Don't use it for bills or the funeral. Put it toward building something that will outlast both of us. That's how you honor a life. Love, Dad." I returned to university with new determination. The insurance money was invested in a carefully researched portfolio of stocks in industries I believed would shape the future. Early computing companies, telecommunications firms developing new technology, and medical research corporations. It wasn't a large sum by investment standards, but it represented something far more valuable than its dollar amount. It was my father's final lesson in leveraging limited resources for maximum long-term impact. My senior year became a balancing act between academic excellence, research participation, and prudent management of my growing investment portfolio. Professor Lawrence introduced me to several colleagues in the finance department who provided additional guidance on emerging market opportunities. Through these connections, I gained access to investment opportunities typically reserved for those with established family wealth or professional connections. Despite these advantages, I maintained the disciplined approach to resource management that had defined my upbringing. While many classmates used summer earnings for European travel or new cars, I continued allocating my resources according to the coffee can principles: immediate needs, short-term goals, and long-term growth. This consistency, while sometimes limiting immediate experiences, created expanding possibilities that would prove invaluable in the decades ahead. Graduation in 1970 presented multiple pathways. Several large financial institutions recruited at the university, offering entry-level positions that promised steady advancement through established hierarchies. These opportunities, while secure, seemed constrained by the gender expectations of the era. Women typically peaked at mid-level analytical roles, while male colleagues continued advancing to executive positions. "The corporate ladder has a glass ceiling," Rebecca Friedman observed during one of our final research meetings. "We can see the top, but aren't permitted to reach it. Perhaps we should consider building our own structure instead." This observation catalyzed thinking that had been developing throughout my education. Rather than entering corporate environments designed to limit my advancement, perhaps creating independent opportunities aligned better with both my skills and circumstances. With this perspective, I declined the corporate offers and instead accepted a position with Atlantic Investment Advisors, a small regional firm where the founder, Arthur Carmichael, had participated in Professor Lawrence's guest lecture series. "We're not prestigious, and the starting salary reflects that," Arthur acknowledged during our interview. "But you'll have direct client contact from day one and portfolio management responsibilities within a year if you demonstrate capability. Gender won't limit your advancement here. Results will determine your trajectory." This approach, prioritizing opportunity and learning over immediate compensation or status, reflected the long-term perspective that had guided my decisions since childhood. The position's modest salary required continuing the careful resource management I had practiced throughout my education, but the accelerated responsibility created value beyond immediate financial returns. Within 18 months, I was managing portfolios for several smaller clients, developing investment strategies tailored to their specific needs and risk tolerances. Unlike larger institutions where relationships were often secondary to transaction volume, Atlantic emphasized understanding client circumstances and goals, approach that resonated with the values my parents had instilled. This period of professional development coincided with significant social transformation. The women's movement gained momentum, challenging traditional assumptions about appropriate roles and opportunities. While I supported these changes philosophically, my approach remained focused on demonstrating capability through results rather than ideological argument. "Changing minds is essential," I explained to Rebecca during one of our regular dinner meetings, where we discussed both business developments and social evolution. "But there are different ways to facilitate change. Some march in the streets while others quietly dismantle barriers by proving their irrelevance through performance." The New England financial world of the 1980s was a landscape dominated by established family names and old money connections. Winters Advisory Group stood apart, a woman-owned firm emphasizing principles of disciplined growth and intergenerational planning in an era increasingly fixated on quarterly results and conspicuous consumption. While Wall Street celebrated leveraged buyouts and junk bonds, we maintained focus on sustainable value creation and preservation across market cycles. Our approach attracted a particular type of client, typically self-made professionals and business owners who appreciated both technical competence and the values-based perspective that informed our recommendations. By 1985, the firm had grown to 15 employees managing over $120 million in client assets, with specialized expertise in wealth transfer strategies and emerging technology investments. This success brought invitations to various boards and industry groups, creating both professional opportunities and surprising personal connections. During a regional economic development conference in Boston, I was seated next to Edward Westfield, patriarch of one of New England's oldest shipping and real estate families and chairman of Westfield Capital Group. "Most people in our field talk constantly but say very little," he remarked after I had contributed briefly to a discussion about portfolio diversification strategies. "You speak rarely but never waste words. That's uncommonly refreshing." This observation, appreciating substance over performance, reflected values alignment I hadn't expected from someone whose family name appeared on buildings throughout Boston. Our conversation continued through dinner, focusing on investment, philosophy, and economic trends rather than the social networking that typically characterized such events. As dessert arrived, Edward shifted toward more personal inquiry. "You've built something substantial without the advantages most in this room started with," he noted. "I'm curious about your path." The question was posed with genuine interest rather than condescension, prompting candid response about my Riverbrook origins and the principles that had guided my development. Rather than dismissing this background as irrelevant to current circumstances, Edward seemed particularly interested in the connection between early experiences and later professional approach. "Those lessons often prove more valuable than anything taught in business schools," he observed. "My grandfather insisted all family members work dockside jobs before entering management. Understanding the foundation supporting your position provides perspective many executives lack." This conversation initiated professional relationship that would significantly influence both our firms over subsequent years. Edward invited me to consult on several family office investments, particularly in areas where traditional wealth management firms lacked specialized expertise. These projects created exposure to investment structures and opportunities typically inaccessible to firms our size, while providing Westfield capital with fresh perspective uncommon in their established environment. Working with the Westfield organization provided invaluable insights into multi-generational wealth management, particularly the challenges of maintaining productive purpose across family transitions where inheritors hadn't experienced the discipline required to build the original resources. Edward spoke candidly about this concern regarding his own children and grandchildren. "Creating wealth requires certain character elements," he observed during one strategic planning session. "Maintaining it across generations requires different but equally important qualities. The transition often fails not for lack of technical structures but absence of transmitted values." This observation reflected concerns I harbored about Victoria, now approaching adolescence with advantages I had never known, but without the formative experiences that had shaped my approach to resources. While academic achievement came naturally to her, the fundamental understanding of value, patience, and disciplined decision-making seemed increasingly difficult to transmit in an environment where abundance removed immediate consequences for poor choices. As our professional connection developed, Edward occasionally mentioned Westfield Manor, historic family estate in western Massachusetts that had particular significance in their family history, but presented mounting maintenance challenges as preservation costs increased. The property, built in 1882 by his great-grandfather, combined architectural significance with extensive grounds requiring specialized care, far exceeding practical utility for modern family use. The rational decision would be selling to appropriate institution, he acknowledged during conversation where we discussed optimal asset allocation for the family's various holdings. But some properties transcend financial calculations. The estate represents continuity with our origins that feels increasingly important in rapidly changing world. This sentiment, valuing heritage beyond immediate utility, resonated with values I had absorbed from my parents despite our vastly different economic circumstances. The careful preservation of family recipes, photographs, and stories in our Riverbrook home reflected similar understanding that certain legacies warranted protection regardless of practical calculation. In 1990, Edward approached me with unusual proposition during one of our regular quarterly review meetings. "The Family Council has been discussing Westfield Manor's future," he explained. "We've considered various options, but traditional approaches all present significant drawbacks. I've suggested alternative that requires someone with particular combination of financial acumen, preservation commitment, and appreciation for historical significance." The proposal he outlined was unprecedented. Private trust structure that would transfer the estate to foundation with specialized preservation mission, while creating lifetime occupancy rights under specific conditions. The arrangement would remove the property from family ownership, while preserving its character and historical significance through carefully structured management approach. We need trustee with both financial expertise and genuine appreciation for the property's non-financial value, he continued. Someone who understands both balance sheets and the importance of heritage. The family council suggested you might consider this role. This proposal, completely unexpected given my background, represented extraordinary opportunity to participate in preserving significant historical property while creating professional challenge unlike anything in my previous experience. After carefully reviewing the complex legal and financial structures involved, I accepted the position with clear understanding of both the responsibilities and opportunities it presented. The trust structure, finalized in early 1991, created innovative preservation model combining foundation, governance with operational partnerships ensuring the property's sustainability. My role as managing trustee involved overseeing both financial investments, supporting ongoing preservation, and operational decisions affecting the property's physical integrity and cultural significance. Over subsequent years, this unique responsibility expanded my professional identity beyond traditional financial management into historic preservation, architectural conservation, and cultural heritage, areas I would never have anticipated when starting my career. The knowledge gained through this work created additional expertise that benefited other clients with significant property holdings or preservation concerns, further differentiating our firm's services from conventional financial advisors. The manor itself became occasional retreat where I could work in surroundings that inspired different perspective than typical financial environments. The library, with volumes dating to the early 19th century, provided historical context that contemporary analysis often lacked. The formal gardens, meticulously maintained according to original design, demonstrated how disciplined stewardship could preserve beauty across generations despite changing external conditions. Victoria occasionally accompanied me during these working visits during her school holidays, developing appreciation for the property's architectural significance and historical context that aligned with her emerging academic interests. These experiences seemed to bridge some of the growing distance between our perspectives, creating shared reference points despite our increasingly different worldviews. "It's like stepping into another century," she observed during one visit, while we walked through the formal rose garden. "Everything feels more intentional than modern spaces, like each element was designed to last for generations, rather than just until the next trend." These moments of connection, increasingly rare as adolescence accelerated her independence, suggested potential for transmitting values across our generational divide, despite the vastly different circumstances shaping our respective worldviews. The manor provided tangible example of principles I had tried to convey through more abstract discussions about resource stewardship and long-term perspective. As Victoria completed high school and began her studies at Radcliffe, our opportunities for such shared experiences diminished. Her academic focus on art history and architecture created natural connection to preservation work, but her social circle increasingly comprised individuals whose relationship with historical properties came through family ownership rather than professional responsibility. Her marriage to Bradford Wellington III in 1998, following their graduation from Harvard, accelerated this social transition. The Wellington family, with industrial holdings dating to the 1880s, moved in circles where estates like Westfield Manor were family properties rather than preservation trusts. Their wedding reception, held at the Wellington Summer Compound in Newport, Rhode Island, exemplified setting where architectural significance and historical value were simply expected elements of appropriate social environment. Bradford, while genuinely devoted to Victoria and professionally accomplished in his own right as venture capital investor, approached properties primarily as status markers rather than heritage responsibilities. His family's multiple homes, Manhattan Apartment, Newport Compound, Aspen Ski Lodge, Palm Beach Residence, represented expected portfolio rather than intentional commitment to specific historical significance. Following their marriage, Victoria's Involvement with my preservation work diminished as the demands of her new social circle and eventually parenthood occupied increasing attention. Their children, my grandchildren Bradford IV, born 2000, and Catherine, born 2003, grew up with privileges beyond anything I could have imagined during my Riverbrook childhood, with private schools, international travel, and summer camps representing normal expectations rather than extraordinary opportunities. Throughout this period, I maintained dual professional identity, leading Winters Advisory Group through significant growth while fulfilling trustee responsibilities for Westfield Manor and several similar properties where our preservation model had been adapted for other historical estates. This balance between financial management and heritage preservation created professional satisfaction that transcended conventional career metrics, connecting daily work with values that had shaped my development since childhood. In 2005, significant transition occurred when Edward Westfield passed away at 87, having remained active in both business and trust oversight until his final illness. His death represented loss of both mentor and kindred spirit, who had recognized alignment between my background and preservation values despite our different origins. The Foundation Board unanimously requested I assume expanded responsibilities as lead trustee with complete oversight of the property's management and preservation direction. This transition coincided with another significant development, Bradford's appointment to leadership position with Wellington Industrial Division, requiring relocation to Chicago. Victoria, rather than accompanying him immediately, requested temporary arrangement where she and the children would remain in their Boston residence until the academic year concluded, allowing Bradford IV to complete his year at current school. During this transitional period, Victoria reached out with surprising request. She and the children would like to spend several weekends at Westfield Manor, while Bradford commuted between Chicago and Boston. The property's western Massachusetts location, while not particularly convenient to Boston, provided peaceful environment where the children could experience something different from their typical urban setting. The kids only know properties as status symbols, she explained during uncharacteristically reflective conversation. I'd like them to understand places can have meaning beyond their market value. The manor seems ideal environment for that perspective. These weekend visits created unexpected opportunity to connect with my grandchildren in setting that naturally prompted discussions about history, preservation, and intergenerational responsibility. Bradford IV, despite initial resistance to environment without immediate entertainment options, gradually developed interest in the estate's mechanical systems and structural engineering. Catherine showed particular fascination with the formal gardens and the meticulous documentation of their evolution through the property's archives. Victoria herself seemed transformed during these visits, temporarily setting aside the social performance that had increasingly defined her adult identity. Walking through the gardens or exploring the library collections, she reconnected with intellectual curiosity that had characterized her college years before social position became primary focus. These glimpses of her authentic nature, increasingly hidden in her Wellington-adjacent identity, created hope that fundamental values might still resonate beneath acquired social patterns. Bradford's Chicago appointment extended from initial, 6-month transition to permanent leadership role, creating decision point for family living arrangements. After considerable discussion, they determined the children would complete their current academic year in Boston with Victoria before relocating to Chicago, where suitable educational arrangements had been identified for following fall. As this deadline approached, Victoria surprised me with unprecedented requests during one of their manor weekends. "The children have thrived here in ways I never anticipated," she explained, as we watched them exploring the formal gardens from library window. "I'm wondering if they might stay with you at your Boston residence to finish their school year while I establish our Chicago household." Bradford's schedule makes consistent parenting impossible during this transition, and your proximity to their school would maintain their routine. This proposal, completely unexpected given our previously limited involvement in the children's daily lives, reflected both practical need and implicit acknowledgement of values alignment she wished to maintain during family transition. The arrangement, while temporary, created opportunity to influence my grandchildren's development more directly than previous circumstances had permitted. The 3 months Bradford Afore and Catherine spent in my care created bonds previously impossible, given the social distance Bradford's family typically maintained from those outside their circle. Morning breakfast discussions about daily decisions and resource allocation connected philosophical principles with practical applications. Weekend visits to the manor continued, with the children gradually assuming small responsibilities in garden maintenance and preservation documentation that connected abstract values with tangible contributions. As the academic year concluded and relocation to Chicago approached, Victoria expressed unexpected hesitation about reuniting the family in their new location. During private conversation at the manor while the children explored the grounds, she acknowledged growing concerns about their marriage and family dynamics. Bradford's vision for our life involves constant social performance I find increasingly hollow, she confided. The children are expected to function as accessories, demonstrating family success rather than developing individual interests. I'm beginning to question whether this environment serves their development or merely perpetuates patterns I've come to recognize as fundamentally empty. These revelations, shared with uncharacteristic vulnerability, suggested potential realignment, with values I had attempted to instill throughout her development. While circumstances remained complicated by practical realities of marriage and financial interdependence, the recognition itself represented significant shift in perspective that created possibility for different future choices. The children ultimately relocated to Chicago as planned, but Victoria maintained regular communication about their development and frequently arranged for them to spend school holidays with me, often incorporating manor visits into these stays. These ongoing connections preserved influence that might otherwise have been lost to geographical separation and provided counterbalance to the materialistic values increasingly dominating their Chicago environment. By 2015, both children had completed their secondary education and begun university studies. Bradford IV pursuing engineering at MIT, while Catherine attended Yale with focus on environmental design and historical preservation. Their academic choices reflected emerging values that combined elements from both family traditions, Wellington achievement orientation with preservation priorities I had emphasized during our time together. Victoria's marriage, while intact, had evolved into primarily social partnership rather than authentic connection. She maintained Boston residence where she spent increasing time focused on arts patronage and historical preservation initiatives, while Bradford's primary focus remained Chicago business operations with periodic appearances at essential social functions where family unity was expected for public presentation. This arrangement, while unconventional, created space for Victoria to reconnect with interests and values increasingly aligned with meaningful purpose rather than social performance. Her involvement with several museum boards and preservation initiatives reflected growing commitment to cultural heritage that transcended typical social obligations of her position. Throughout this period, my professional responsibilities continued, evolving, with leadership transition at Winters Advisory Group creating more advisory role, while my preservation work expanded to include several additional properties beyond Westfield Manor. This balance allowed continued meaningful contribution while creating space for family engagement that had become increasingly important as my grandchildren developed their own independent identities. In early 2017, unexpected opportunity emerged when Westfield Manor's resident caretaker announced retirement plans after 27 years managing the property's daily operations. The position required presence at the estate and comprehensive understanding of both its historical significance and complex maintenance needs, combination making suitable replacement difficult to identify through conventional hiring channels. After careful consideration and consultation with Foundation Board, I proposed transitioning from my Boston residence to the manor's primary living quarters, combining trustee oversight with daily operational presence that would ensure continuity while new management approach was developed. This arrangement would allow comprehensive documentation of institutional knowledge that might otherwise be lost while providing ideal environment for my current work balancing financial oversight with preservation priorities. The board enthusiastically endorsed this proposal, recognizing unique opportunity to maintain consistent leadership through significant operational transition. My relocation was scheduled for summer 2017, allowing orderly transition from Boston residence and establishment of appropriate workspace within the manor to accommodate ongoing professional responsibilities. Victoria's response to this announcement was surprisingly enthusiastic, suggesting potential for increased family visits once I occupied the main residence, rather than utilizing temporary accommodations during working visits. The children, now young adults pursuing their own educational paths, similarly expressed interest in spending portions of their academic breaks at the estate where they had formed significant memories during their earlier family transition. The manor's primary residence, a 17-room living space occupying the estate's eastern wing, required modest updates to accommodate contemporary technology needs while maintaining historical integrity. These renovations, completed during spring 2017, created perfect balance between preservation authenticity and functional requirements for both living and working in historically significant space. My relocation to Westfield Manor in June 2017 represented both professional evolution and personal alignment with values that had guided my development since childhood. The estate's deliberate design, meticulous craftsmanship, and continuous care embodied principles of stewardship and long-term perspective that connected directly to lessons learned at my parents' kitchen table in Riverbrook decades earlier. The satisfaction of this alignment, professional responsibilities perfectly integrated with personal values, created confidence that my life's work had achieved meaningful purpose, transcending conventional metrics of success. What I could never have anticipated was how this quiet fulfillment would soon be tested by unexpected family dynamics that would reveal just how differently Victoria had integrated the values I had attempted to transmit throughout her development. Shift in Victoria's attitude toward Westfield Manor began subtly in early 2018, nearly a year after I had taken up residence in the main house. What started as casual inquiries about the property's market value during one of our monthly lunches gradually evolved into more pointed questions about the trust structure and foundation governance. It seems extraordinary that such a magnificent property remains essentially private when it could generate significant revenue as an event venue, she remarked during one such conversation. Surely the foundation board would consider selective commercial use that could fund additional preservation work. The suggestion itself wasn't unreasonable. Many historic properties balanced preservation with limited commercial activities to support ongoing maintenance. What struck me as unusual was Victoria's sudden interest in operational details she had previously shown little concern for, despite my involvement spanning nearly 3 decades. The trust structure specifically limits commercial activities to those directly supporting educational and preservation objectives, I explained. The Westfield family intentionally prioritized historical integrity over revenue generation when establishing the foundation. Victoria's slight frown suggested this answer didn't align with whatever purpose had prompted her inquiry. But surely, that was established before modern preservation economics were fully understood. Contemporary governance would likely take different approach given current realities. This characterization, implying outdated thinking rather than deliberate values-based choice, reflected perspective increasingly evident in Victoria's approach to heritage properties. Her involvement with several museum boards had recently shifted toward modernization initiatives, emphasizing visitor experiences and event revenue over traditional preservation priorities. The following month, Victoria mentioned that Bradford, would be visiting Boston for a series of investment meetings, expressing interest in bringing him to the manor to discuss some ideas about the property's potential. This request seemed reasonable enough on the surface. Family connections to preservation work had always been encouraged, but something in her phrasing triggered mild concern about their objectives. Their visit, scheduled for a Friday afternoon, in March, began pleasantly enough with tour of recent conservation work in the formal gardens. Bradford, whom I had seen infrequently since their effective separation, maintained his characteristic charm while displaying limited interest in preservation details. His questions consistently turned toward property boundaries, zoning regulations, and adjacent land ownership, matters relevant to development potential rather than conservation values. As we settled in the library for tea, the purpose of their visit became clearer. Bradford placed elegantly bound presentation folder on the table between us, opening to reveal architectural renderings of Westfield Manor transformed into luxury hotel and event venue. Victoria mentioned the foundation might be exploring sustainability options. He began with practiced casualness that didn't quite mask the presumption underlying the statement. Wellington Hospitality Group has developed specialized expertise in historic property adaptive reuse. These concepts represent preliminary vision for partnership that could ensure the manor's financial future while honoring its historical significance. The renderings revealed comprehensive reimagining of the estate. Main house converted to luxury suites, new buildings disguised as period-appropriate expansions, formal gardens redesigned to accommodate wedding venues and corporate events. While aesthetically consistent with architectural style, the proposal fundamentally misunderstood, or deliberately ignored, the property's preservation mission. This represents significant departure from the Trust's established purpose, I noted, maintaining professional tone despite growing concern about their apparent coordination. The foundation exists specifically to prevent commercial development, regardless of how tastefully executed. Victoria leaned forward with expression I recognized from her childhood negotiations for extended curfews or increased allowance. Determined reasonableness, masking unwillingness to accept negative response. Mother, preservation philosophies have evolved significantly since the Trust was established. Contemporary approaches recognize that appropriate activation creates sustainable funding while introducing new generations to historical properties that might otherwise remain irrelevant to modern society. Rather than direct confrontation that might escalate tensions unproductively, I shifted toward procedural reality that removed immediate pressure for substantive response. Any significant change to the property's use would require unanimous approval from the Foundation Board, comprehensive legal review regarding trust restrictions, and likely court determination about permissibility under the original indenture, I explained. These governance mechanisms were deliberately established to ensure preservation priorities remain paramount, despite changing external pressures. Bradford's slight expression shift suggested this procedural complexity exceeded what Victoria had prepared him for, creating tactical advantage I leveraged to redirect conversation toward less contentious aspects of preservation planning. By emphasizing ongoing conservation projects and educational initiatives already underway, I effectively closed immediate discussion of their proposal without creating direct confrontation that might damage family relationships. After their departure, I contacted Edward Westfield Jr., who had succeeded his father as family representative on the Foundation Board, to discuss potential concerns about commercial development pressure. His response confirmed my understanding of trust provisions while offering additional historical context about previous attempts to modify the estate's protected status. My grandfather anticipated exactly these pressures, he noted during our call. The legal structure was deliberately designed to withstand reasonable arguments for commercialization that inevitably arise when property values increase or maintenance costs grow. The provisions aren't accidental or outdated. They represent specific value judgment about prioritizing historical integrity over financial optimization. The following weeks brought subtle but noticeable shift in Victoria's communications. Her previously regular calls became less frequent, while her questions focused increasingly on governance details and board membership rather than preservation activities or family matters. This pattern, information gathering rather than authentic connection, suggested developing strategy rather than genuine interest in the property's mission. In late April, she requested comprehensive documents regarding the trust structure, foundation bylaws, and board appointment procedures, information technically available to family members but rarely requested except during formal governance transitions. Her explanation, citing academic interest in preservation models for potential graduate research, seemed plausible but incongruent with her previously limited interest in technical preservation governance. The anticipated visit with Bradford's parents, originally scheduled for May, was postponed multiple times before being indefinitely delayed, suggesting possible recalibration of their approach after discovering stronger governance protections than initially anticipated. Victoria's communications shifted toward casual family matters, with preservation topics notably absent compared to previous patterns. This apparent retreat proved temporary rather than permanent. By midsummer, new approach emerged when Victoria mentioned Bradford Affor's interest in combining engineering studies with historical preservation experience through potential internship at the manor. This suggestion, positioning her son's involvement as educational opportunity rather than continued commercial exploration, created complex considerations balancing family relationships with foundation responsibilities. Bradford Affor arrived in July for a 6-week program combining practical conservation experience with research in the property's extensive architectural archives. Unlike earlier encounters with his parents, his engagement appeared genuinely focused on technical challenges rather than development potential. His questions concentrated on engineering solutions for preservation problems, maintaining century-old systems while honoring historical integrity, suggesting authentic interest beyond any family agenda. "This place is amazing," he commented while examining original blueprints for the estate's innovative 1882 heating system. The craftsmanship and engineering precision with materials they had available, it's incredible how they solved problems we're still struggling with today. His genuine appreciation for the property's technical and historical significance created meaningful connection, transcending whatever strategic purpose might have motivated Victoria's initial suggestion. Our conversations during his internship revealed emerging values alignment despite his parents' different orientation. His engineering perspective naturally recognized the integrated relationship between preservation principles and structural integrity that commercial adaptation inevitably compromised. The relative calm continued through fall and early winter, with Victoria maintaining minimal communication focused on logistical matters while avoiding substantive engagement with either previous conflicts or ongoing preservation work. This superficial detente created workable if distant relationship that seemed preferable to continued boundary testing, though underlying tension remained unresolved rather than genuinely addressed. The equilibrium fractured unexpectedly in February 2019, with unexpected call from Victoria, announcing plans for significant Wellington family event at the manor in early April. The occasion, Bradford's parents' 50th wedding anniversary, would bring together extended Wellington family network for weekend celebration, combining family tradition with business networking typical of their social events. "We'd like to host approximately 70 guests for formal dinner and reception," Victoria explained, with tone suggesting routine request rather than unprecedented proposal completely inconsistent with the property's non-commercial status. The manor would provide perfect setting for celebration honoring Bradford's parents' legacy. The request presented multiple concerns beyond simple policy consistency. While occasional family visits had always been welcomed, large-scale private event directly violated trust provisions prohibiting commercial-scale entertainment unrelated to educational or preservation mission. More concerning was apparent assumption that such event would naturally be permitted, despite clear contradiction with foundation policy consistently applied to all similar requests, regardless of connection. Victoria, the manor isn't available. For private events regardless of family connection, I explained carefully. The trust specifically prohibits social functions unrelated to educational or preservation objectives. This policy has been consistently maintained since the Foundation's establishment. Her response revealed concerning expectation of exceptional treatment, despite clear governance boundaries. Mother, this isn't some random social event. It's significant family celebration with people who could become important supporters of the Foundation's work. Surely the board would recognize the relationship-building value for the property's future. The board applies these policies consistently regardless of potential donor relationships, I responded firmly. Creating exceptions based on personal connections would violate both governance principles and my fiduciary responsibility to the Foundation. Victoria's frustration became immediately apparent, with formality replacing the casual tone she had initially adopted. I'm disappointed. You're taking such rigid position on something this important to Bradford's family. They've been extremely supportive of my preservation interests, and this rejection sends concerning message about reciprocal relationship. The conversation ended with Victoria's clipped acknowledgement that she would explore alternative venues for the anniversary celebration, though her tone suggested the matter wasn't concluded from her perspective. This assessment proved accurate when, 2 weeks later, Edward Westfield Jr. contacted me regarding unusual inquiry he had received from Wellington family representative about potential temporary variance from trust restrictions for special event. They approached our family foundation directly, he explained with evident concern. The request suggested you were supportive but facing bureaucratic obstacles from other board members. I wanted to verify your position before responding formally. This attempted end run around established governance, misrepresenting my position to approach Westfield family directly, represented disturbing escalation beyond simple disappointment with denied request. The willingness to undermine both my professional standing and foundation governance for social event reflected concerning value priorities I had never anticipated from Victoria, despite our different perspectives. After clarifying the situation, with Edward and agreeing on coordinated response emphasizing governance consistency, I contacted Victoria directly about this concerning development. Rather than defensive explanation or embarrassed acknowledgement, her response revealed surprising strategic shift completely disconnected from our previous discussion. Since you're so concerned about property's educational mission, we've reframed the event as private symposium exploring historic preservation economics. She explained with transparent attempt to circumvent previous objections through superficial redefinition. Several Wellington associates with relevant expertise would present brief remarks during dinner, qualifying the event under educational provisions. Victoria, creating nominal educational component, doesn't transform private celebration into mission-aligned programming, I responded with increasing concern about her apparent willingness to manipulate governance systems. This approach undermines the integrity of both the Foundation's mission and the family event itself through transparent pretense. Her response, immediate shift from attempted persuasion to direct pressure, revealed relationship dynamic I had never anticipated experiencing with my daughter. Mother, I've been extremely patient with your excessive attachment to bureaucratic details over practical realities. The Wellingtons have significant influence in preservation circles that could benefit or complicate the manor's future depending on how they're treated. This unnecessary rejection creates problems extending far beyond single event. Rather than engaging escalating conflict directly, I maintained boundary clarity while acknowledging legitimate family celebration importance. I understand the anniversary's significance and would be happy to help identify alternative venues with similar historical character but different usage policies. Several properties in the region specifically welcome such events while maintaining historical ambiance. This alternative, addressing legitimate celebration needs while maintaining governance integrity, was summarily rejected with concerning statement revealing Victoria's actual perspective on the property's status. The Wellingtons shouldn't need to rent commercial venue when family connections should provide natural access to appropriate setting. Your position unnecessarily complicates situation that should be straightforward given your relationship to both the property and our family. The conversation ended with apparent acceptance that the event would require alternative venue, though Victoria's final comment, "We'll need to reconsider our approach," suggested strategic retreat rather than genuine acceptance of governance reality. This assessment proved accurate when, several weeks later, Catherine called with seemingly casual inquiry about visiting the manor during her spring break to help with research project on historical gardens. This request, unlike previous maneuvering, seemed potentially genuine given Catherine's legitimate academic interest in landscape architecture and environmental design. After confirming appropriate timing with manor staff, I welcomed the visit while establishing clear expectations about residential accommodations and property access aligned with standard educational visitor protocols. Catherine arrived in late March, apparently alone and focused on genuine research activities consistent with her stated academic interests. Her engagement with the garden documentation archives and thoughtful questions about landscape preservation techniques suggested authentic alignment with the property's educational mission rather than strategic positioning. This impression of legitimate educational visit continued until the third evening of her stay, when she mentioned a few classmates might join briefly to compare notes on similar research projects at other historic properties. This casual reference, presented as minor detail rather than significant change to approved arrangements, triggered concern about potential coordination with previous event planning attempts. How many classmates are you expecting, and what specifically would their visit involve? I asked with careful neutrality that avoided revealing growing suspicion while seeking necessary information. Catherine's hesitation before responding confirmed developing concerns about coordinated strategy disguised as academic interest. Just a small study group, maybe 15 people maximum. They're interested in comparing documentation methods across different properties. The number, while presented as minor detail, represented significant deviation from individual research visit, originally approved. Further discussion revealed these classmates would arrive Friday evening and depart Sunday afternoon. Timing suspiciously aligned with originally proposed anniversary weekend, despite supposedly independent academic purpose. Rather than directly challenging likely misrepresentation, I maintained focus on operational realities that established appropriate boundaries without creating direct confrontation that might damage relationship with Catherine, whose academic interest appeared genuine, despite potential manipulation by her parents. Educational group visits require advanced coordination with preservation staff to ensure appropriate resources and supervision, I explained. The timing wouldn't allow proper arrangements for meaningful academic engagement with the collections and grounds. Perhaps we could schedule formal group visit later in the semester, when staff could prepare appropriate educational program. Catherine's visible discomfort with this response suggested conflicting loyalties between genuine academic interest and parental expectations regarding Wellington anniversary arrangements. After awkward silence, she acknowledged that the classmates included family connections beyond actual study partners, confirming suspicion about coordinated attempt to circumvent previous event restrictions through misleading academic pretense. That evening's discussion with Catherine, focusing on authentic preservation ethics rather than immediate event conflict, created unexpected opportunity for values transmission that previous tensions with Victoria had complicated. Catherine's thoughtful questions about balancing accessibility against preservation integrity demonstrated genuine engagement with complex principles rather than superficial compliance with parental strategy. I understand why commercial events would compromise the property's integrity, she acknowledged as our conversation extended into late evening. The fundamental mission centers on preserving historical authenticity, not maximizing property utility, for contemporary social functions. That distinction seems central to legitimate preservation versus decorative historicism. The following morning, Catherine departed earlier than originally planned, explaining need to help with alternative arrangements for family gathering now scheduled at nearby historic hotel specifically designed for upscale events. This resolution, selecting venue appropriate to event purpose rather than attempting to repurpose preservation property, represented practical acceptance of boundaries I had maintained throughout the uncomfortable process. The anniversary celebration proceeded at alternative location without further attempt to involve the manor, though Victoria's communication became noticeably formal and infrequent following this episode. Bradford 4 maintained more consistent contact, sharing updates about engineering projects and occasionally seeking technical advice about preservation challenges in his academic work, suggesting different values orientation than his parents, despite shared family context. This period of strained but manageable relationship continued through summer and early fall, with occasional family visits maintaining superficial cordiality while avoiding substantive discussion of the spring conflict. Victoria's communication focused exclusively on logistical matters regarding occasional grandchildren visits, with preservation topics notably absent compared to previous patterns of engagement. The temporary equilibrium fractured in November, with unexpected letter from Wellington family attorney requesting comprehensive documentation of trust provisions and occupancy rights regarding my residence at the manor. The inquiry, while framed as routine legal research, contained concerning language about ensuring appropriate distinction between professional responsibilities and personal benefits regarding trustee housing arrangements. This unprecedented legal inquiry, clearly targeting my residential status without direct reference to earlier conflicts, suggested concerning escalation from event disagreement to potential challenge of my legitimate role as resident trustee. The timing, following several months of superficial peace, indicated strategic approach rather than emotional reaction, with legal leverage replacing previous social pressure tactics. Rather than defensive response that might inadvertently validate inappropriate inquiry, I directed the Foundation's legal counsel to provide factual response emphasizing board-approved resident trustee arrangement, clear documentation of housing as compensation component rather than personal benefit, and complete transparency regarding all governance approvals, establishing the legitimate arrangement. This professional response, addressing factual matters while avoiding personalization of increasingly concerning conflict, maintained appropriate boundaries while creating clear documentation trail should further escalation occur. The Wellington attorney's acknowledgement without substantive follow-up suggested tactical retreat rather than abandoned strategy. Assessment confirmed when Catherine called in early December with seemingly innocuous holiday question that revealed disturbing new development. I wanted to confirm which weekend would work best for Christmas visit. She began with casual tone, belying the significant information embedded in subsequent comment. Mom mentioned you might be traveling more with your trustee role evolving toward oversight rather than direct residence. This reference, to supposed transition I had never mentioned nor contemplated, revealed concerning narrative being developed within Wellington family circles about my manor role. Someone, presumably Victoria, was characterizing my position as transitioning away from residence despite no such development occurring or being contemplated by either me or the Foundation board. Rather than creating immediate confrontation that might disrupt holiday planning, I simply clarified my continuing residential status while suggesting dates that would accommodate family visits within normal property schedule. Catherine's slight hesitation suggested awareness of discrepancy between her mother's characterization and actual situation, though she didn't directly acknowledge the contradiction. The holiday visit itself proceeded with superficial pleasantness, masking underlying tensions. Victoria's brief appearance, arriving late and departing early with explanation of additional Wellington family obligations, maintained minimal cordiality while avoiding substantive conversation about either previous conflicts or continuing. Residents' mischaracterization, Bradford IV and Catherine remained longer. Their genuine engagement with the property and thoughtful questions about preservation challenges creating meaningful connection despite parental tensions. Their evident appreciation for the manor's historical significance and preservation mission suggested values, transmission transcending immediate family conflict, creating hope for eventual reconciliation despite Victoria's concerning strategic approaches. January brought unexpected letter from Wellington family attorney requesting comprehensive documentation of trust provisions and occupancy rights regarding my residence at the manor. The inquiry, while framed as routine legal research, contained concerning language about ensuring appropriate distinction between professional responsibilities and personal benefits regarding trustee housing arrangements. This unprecedented legal inquiry, clearly targeting my residential status without direct reference to earlier conflicts, suggested concerning escalation from event disagreement to potential challenge of my legitimate role as resident trustee. The timing, following several months of superficial peace, indicated strategic approach rather than emotional reaction, with legal leverage replacing previous social pressure tactics, rather than defensive response that might inadvertently validate inappropriate inquiry. I directed the Foundation's legal counsel to provide factual response emphasizing board-approved resident trustee arrangement, clear documentation of housing as compensation component rather than personal benefit, and complete transparency regarding all governance approvals establishing the legitimate arrangement. The Wellington attorney's acknowledgement without substantive follow-up suggested tactical retreat rather than abandoned strategy, assessment. Confirmed when Catherine called in early December with seemingly innocuous holiday question that revealed disturbing new development. I wanted to confirm which weekend would work best for Christmas visit. She began with casual tone belying the significant information embedded in subsequent comment. Mom mentioned you might be traveling more with your trustee role evolving toward oversight rather than direct residence. This reference, to supposed transition I had never mentioned nor contemplated, revealed concerning narrative being developed within Wellington family circles about my manor role. Someone, presumably Victoria, was characterizing my position as transitioning away from residence despite no such development occurring or being contemplated by either me or the Foundation board. Rather than creating immediate confrontation that might disrupt holiday planning, I simply clarified my continuing residential status while suggesting dates that would accommodate family visits within normal property schedule. Catherine's slight hesitation suggested awareness of discrepancy between her mother's characterization and actual situation, though she didn't directly acknowledge the contradiction. The holiday visit itself proceeded with superficial pleasantness. Victoria maintained minimal engagement, participating in social interaction while avoiding substantive conversation about either preservation principles or relationship dynamics. This tactical distance suggested strategic recalibration rather than genuine reconciliation, despite situation resolution preserving both governance integrity and basic family connection. As departure arrangements concluded following abbreviated celebration, Victoria's parting comment revealed continuing strategic persistence. We should discuss future arrangements ensuring appropriate balance between institutional requirements and family relationship expectations, she noted with deliberately casual tone masking evident agenda. The Wellington Anniversary Gathering. Next month presents perfect opportunity addressing continuing questions through practical demonstration rather than theoretical boundaries. This reference, introducing new event proposal despite unsuccessful resolution of fundamental governance misalignment, demonstrated persistent strategic objective transcending specific celebration conflict. The implied expectation of more flexible governance application, despite consistent boundary clarification revealed concerning entitlement perspective regarding property access, fundamentally inconsistent with preservation mission. Bradford Sr.'s unexpected intervention provided Surprising support transcending immediate conflict. Victoria. Preservation integrity necessarily requires consistent boundary application, regardless of family connection or celebration purpose, he stated with quiet certainty. The manor's protected status exists through deliberate governance. Structure specifically designed preventing exceptions, potentially compromising historical significance through incremental accommodation. Victoria's visible surprise at parental contradiction rather than automatic support indicated genuine expectation of generational alignment despite emerging resistance from multiple directions throughout orchestrated confrontation. Her momentary speechlessness suggested tactical recalibration, necessity given unexpected values, divergence within Wellington family itself. As spring approached, Victoria maintained minimal communication, focused on logistical matters while avoiding substantive engagement with either previous conflicts or ongoing preservation work. This superficial detente created workable if distant relationship that seemed preferable to continued boundary testing, though underlying tension remained unresolved. The equilibrium fractured unexpectedly in early March with casual email from Victoria announcing plans to spend Mother's Day weekend at the manor with family as special surprise she had been planning for months. The message, combining emotional appeal with implied arrangement finality, suggested celebration requiring minimal confirmation while offering to handle all arrangements, minimizing impact on my schedule. This framing, positioning significant. Social event as thoughtful celebration requiring mere acknowledgement rather than formal approval, represented concerning return to previous pattern of presenting fait accompli rather than requesting appropriate permission consistent with established policies. The deliberate emotional leverage, using Mother's Day as occasion supposedly immune from governance consideration, created difficult balance between family relationship and institutional responsibilities. My response acknowledged thoughtful gesture while requesting detailed attendance list, specific proposed activities, and explicit recognition of established policies regarding social functions, regardless of family connection or celebratory occasion. Victoria's delayed response positioned Mother's Day celebration as inherent exception to normal policies, suggesting governance requirements became secondary to family obligation during occasions honoring maternal relationship, regardless of institutional responsibilities or preservation mission. Mother, your continuing attachment to procedural details over meaningful family celebration creates unnecessary barriers to relationship that should transcend administrative technicalities, she wrote with tone suggesting righteous frustration. Mother's Day specifically honors maternal relationship that exists completely independent from professional role. Prioritizing institutional policy over fundamental family connection on this particular day seems deliberately hurtful. This characterization, fundamentally misconstruing governance reality as optional choice, actively selected over family relationship, demonstrated either concerning failure to comprehend institutional responsibilities despite numerous explanations, or deliberate emotional manipulation, attempting to create alternate framework where established policies became personal rejection rather than professional requirement. Bradford IV's alarming call several days later revealed disturbing strategy, persistence despite comprehensive rejection throughout orchestrated confrontation. I'm really uncomfortable sharing this, but believe you should know, he began with evident ethical concern. Mom and Dad are planning major surprise for Mother's Day weekend. They've told extended family and business associates they're hosting celebration at the manor regardless of previous discussions. They're assuming once everyone arrives expecting promised gathering, you'll be forced to accommodate rather than create embarrassing situation for uninvolved guests. This concerning revelation, orchestrated large-scale deception rather than continued persuasion attempts, created immediate practical problem requiring prompt response, protecting both governance integrity and uninvolved guests presumably unaware of manipulative circumstances. The deliberately calculated nature of planned deception demonstrated values, misalignment transcending previous tensions. creating fundamental ethical breach requiring direct rather than diplomatic response, despite potential family conflict. After thanking Bradford IV for his integrity while assuring him appropriate resolution would minimize embarrassment for uninvolved guests, I implemented immediate protective measures including security notification regarding unauthorized event, formal communication to Victoria and Bradford documenting policy violation attempt, and proactive outreach to catering company clarifying event prohibition. Victoria's response arrived with surprising swiftness, abandoning previous tactical restraint while revealing concerning entitlement perspectives. Your unnecessary escalation contacting external vendors creates embarrassing situation easily avoided through reasonable family accommodation, she wrote with evident frustration. The Wellingtons have significant influence in preservation circles that could substantially benefit or complicate foundation relationships, depending on how family celebration requests are handled. This explicit leverage attempt, threatening foundation relationships based on family event accommodation, revealed concerning transactional perspective fundamentally incompatible with preservation ethics. The apparent assumption that institutional integrity should naturally yield to social influence or potential benefit demonstrated values misalignment, transcending specific event disagreement, creating fundamental ethical disconnect increasingly difficult to bridge through reasonable communication. Victoria's communication ceased entirely following this exchange, suggesting tactical retreat while developing different approach given documented awareness of orchestrated deception preventing successful implementation of original strategy. This concerning silence indicated potential escalation beyond previous approaches, rather than genuine acceptance of governance reality, consistently demonstrated throughout preceding conflicts. This assessment proved accurate when, 1 week before, Mother's Day weekend, Bradford IV called with alarming new information, suggesting fundamental strategy shift beyond previous boundary testing toward direct confrontation, deliberately creating governance crisis rather than continuing incremental pressure through various persuasive approaches. I need to warn you about what's being planned, he began with evident distress. They've completely changed approach after the catering situation. Instead of large celebration, they're planning small family gathering with just immediate Wellington family members arriving Friday evening. They'll be bringing Catherine and me along with Bradford's parents, explicitly presenting visit as modest Mother's Day weekend rather than social function. While this revised plan superficially addressed policy concerns through dramatically reduced scale, Bradford IV's continuing information revealed concerning strategic development beneath apparent compliance. Once they're physically present Friday evening, they plan implementing what Dad calls residence reassessment strategy. They'll insist your trustee quarters are unnecessarily large for single occupant, suggesting immediate family naturally deserves access to main house spaces, while relegating you to smaller accommodations during their stay. This strategy, leveraging physical presence to force governance concessions through implied social pressure, represented concerning escalation beyond previous boundary testing through various persuasive approaches. The deliberate planning to create confrontational situation once physically present demonstrated values prioritization fundamentally inconsistent with either preservation ethics or basic relationship respect, suggesting coordinated approach requiring direct rather than diplomatic response despite potential family conflict. The specific targeting of residential arrangements, attempting to physically displace legitimate trustee from designated quarters through implied entitlement to property access, created particularly concerning dimension transcending previous event access requests toward fundamental challenge to governance structure itself. The apparent willingness to create direct confrontation potentially damaging to both institutional integrity and family relationship demonstrated concerning prioritization fundamentally inconsistent with preservation values. Rather than creating preemptive rejection potentially escalating family conflict unnecessarily, I focused on appropriate preparation, ensuring governance protection, while maintaining possibility for positive outcome should actual visit proceed with genuine family connection rather than orchestrated confrontation. These preparations included comprehensive documentation of all trustee residential provisions established through formal foundation processes, clear communication with security and staff regarding authorized access protocols, and appropriate physical arrangements accommodating family visit within established guidelines while protecting governance integrity. The anticipated visit began Friday evening with arrival of Victoria and Bradford, accompanied by Bradford's parents and both adult children, creating superficial appearance of modest family gathering within appropriate guidelines previously established through numerous communications regarding visitor policies. Their initial demeanor, carefully casual cordiality suggesting routine family visit rather than orchestrated confrontation, maintained tactical approach concealing actual strategy until physical presence created leverage against governance boundaries. After initial greetings and superficial conversation regarding travel details, Victoria initiated planned strategy with practiced casualness, carefully disguising orchestrated confrontation beneath seemingly reasonable observation regarding residence arrangements. "Mother, these main house quarters seem unnecessarily expansive for single occupant," she noted while surveying living room with deliberate assessment expression. "Surely during family visits, more appropriate space allocation would place primary family gathering in main residence while trustee could temporarily utilize smaller accommodation elsewhere on property." This framing, positioning fundamental governance challenge as reasonable space allocation adjustment, represented sophisticated approach creating implied social pressure through physical presence while avoiding direct policy violation that might trigger immediate security response. The strategy relied on manipulating social dynamics to create incremental governance concession, establishing precedent for future boundary testing rather than continuing direct confrontation with consistently maintained policies. Bradford Sr.'s uncomfortable expressions suggested potential values, misalignment with orchestrated confrontation strategy, creating possible leverage point, addressing governance preservation while maintaining family relationship, potentially strained through Victoria and Bradford's persistent boundary testing despite consistent clarification. Rather than engaging direct confrontation, potentially damaging relationship with uninvolved family members, I suggested comprehensive property tour, providing educational context regarding foundation operations while demonstrating legitimate purpose behind established arrangements. As evening progressed toward dinner arrangements, Victoria implemented next phase of orchestrated strategy with practiced social grace, disguising deliberate governance challenge beneath hospitality gesture. "We've arranged beautiful family dinner in formal dining room," she announced with tone suggesting thoughtful planning rather than deliberate boundary testing. "The catering staff should have everything prepared shortly, allowing proper Mother's Day celebration in appropriate manner setting." This announcement, revealing unauthorized arrangements directly violating previously communicated policies, demonstrated continuing governance challenge despite clear documentation regarding visitor guidelines consistently applied regardless of family connection. The presence of catering staff not previously disclosed or approved created deliberate policy violation disguised as thoughtful celebration, placing governance boundaries in direct conflict with family relationship through carefully orchestrated confrontation strategy. Rather than creating public disagreement potentially embarrassing uninvolved family members, I suggested private conversation with Victoria and Bradford, while others enjoyed refreshments in appropriate visitor area. This approach, maintaining hospitality toward uninvolved participants while addressing orchestrated violation directly, created appropriate balance between governance protection and relationship preservation despite deliberate boundary testing. Once, in private library setting, I addressed orchestrated violation directly while maintaining professional composure despite concerning manipulation attempting to leverage family relationship against governance responsibilities. The unauthorized catering arrangements directly violate policies you're fully aware of through numerous previous communications, I noted with clarity, avoiding unnecessary personalization, despite evident manipulation. This deliberate boundary Testing places both family relationship and governance integrity in unnecessary conflict through orchestrated confrontation rather than respectful communication. Victoria's response abandoned previous tactical restraint, revealing concerning perspective previously disguised beneath more diplomatic communication. Your continuing rigidity about entirely reasonable family gathering demonstrates disturbing prioritization, placing institutional technicalities above fundamental relationship obligations, she stated with evident frustration. Most trustees would naturally accommodate immediate family regardless of theoretical restrictions. This unnecessary division creates lasting damage serving no genuine preservation purpose. Bradford's contribution, smoothly pivoting toward compromise, seemingly addressing immediate conflict while actually establishing concerning precedent, revealed sophisticated strategy development beneath apparently reasonable suggestion. Perhaps we could find middle ground accommodating both governance concerns and family celebration, he offered with practiced reasonableness, masking obvious boundary testing. The family could utilize main house public spaces for modest dinner, while Eleanor temporarily relocates to smaller accommodation elsewhere on property, maintaining technical separation between trustee residence and family gathering. This suggestion, superficially, addressing governance concern while actually creating fundamental precedent, challenging trustee authority, represented sophisticated approach attempting incremental boundary erosion, rather than direct confrontation with consistently maintained policies. The implied trustee displacement from legitimate quarters established through formal foundation processes revealed concerning entitlement perspective regarding property access, fundamentally inconsistent with either preservation ethics or basics relationship respect. Rather than rejecting suggestion outright and potentially escalating conflict unnecessarily, I acknowledged dinner arrangements while establishing clear parameters preventing governance compromise despite social pressure. The family is welcome to enjoy catered dinner in appropriate visitor dining area specifically designed for educational programs with refreshment component, I responded with professional clarity. The trustee residence remains governance protected, space regardless of family connection or celebratory occasion, maintaining consistent policy application essential to preservation mission. Victoria's evident frustration with boundary maintenance despite orchestrated pressure suggested tactical retreat rather than genuine acceptance of governance reality repeatedly clarified throughout preceding conflicts. Her clipped acknowledgement, while avoiding direct eye contact, indicated strategy recalibration rather than resolution. Assessment confirmed when Catherine approached several minutes later, with uncomfortable expressions suggesting parental direction rather than personal initiative. Mom asked me to tell you they've decided we'll all stay at local hotel tonight rather than manor guest quarters as originally planned, she stated with evident discomfort, indicating awareness of orchestrated manipulation placing her in awkward, intermediary position. They feel continuing evening here creates uncomfortable situation given unexpected policy limitations. We'll return tomorrow for brief Mother's Day celebration before departing earlier than originally scheduled. This strategic retreat, creating implied criticism through premature departure while avoiding direct confrontation with security protocols, potentially implementing governance boundaries through formal procedures, maintained tactical flexibility, while developing different approach given unsuccessful implementation of residential displacement strategy. The deliberate involving of Catherine as reluctant messenger created additional manipulation layer, attempting emotional leverage through parent-child relationship despite governance boundaries correctly maintained through professional rather than personal perspective. The following morning brought unexpected development when Victoria and Bradford returned alone, without either Bradford's parents or adult children, suggesting strategy modification focused on direct confrontation rather than social pressure through family presence. Their arrival, precisely timed during scheduled educational program occupying main visitor spaces, created deliberate operational challenge, requiring immediate response balancing governance protection with appropriate hospitality, despite orchestrated manipulation. Victoria's opening statement revealed concerning escalation beyond previous boundary testing toward direct governance challenge disguised beneath Mother's Day celebration. "We've arranged special Wellington family brunch honoring your maternal role despite continuing policy complications," she announced, with practiced social grace masking evident agenda. "The remaining Wellington family members will arrive shortly, with modest celebration arrangements requiring main house access, given educational program currently occupying standard visitor areas." Bradford's intervention revealed key aspect of coordinated strategy previously disguised beneath seemingly separate developments. Mother, continuing resistance to reasonable family accommodation creates unnecessary conflict easily resolved through modest flexibility, he noted, with practiced reasonableness masking evident agenda. The Wellington family maintains significant preservation community connections that could substantially impact foundation relationships, depending on how reasonable family requests are addressed. This situation extends far beyond single celebration toward broader institutional consideration, requiring practical rather than theoretical approach. This explicit leverage attempt, threatening foundation relationships based on family accommodation, represented concerning escalation beyond previous boundary testing toward direct governance pressure through implied external consequences. The willingness to potentially damage preservation relationships to achieve personal convenience demonstrated values misalignment, transcending specific event disagreement, creating fundamental ethical disconnect increasingly difficult to bridge through reasonable communication. As the afternoon progressed, with Wellington family members arriving in small groups creating incremental pressure through accumulated presence, rather than single large contingent potentially triggering security protocols, Victoria implemented final phase of orchestrated strategy with practiced social grace disguising deliberate governance challenge beneath celebration context. "Mother, we've prepared modest accommodation in the attic room for tonight, allowing family gathering utilizing main residence spaces appropriately suited for celebration context," she announced, with tone suggesting thoughtful arrangement rather than forced displacement. "Your personal items have already been relocated, creating convenient overnight arrangement, maintaining appropriate space utilization during family gathering, temporary requiring main house access despite continuing policy considerations." This statement, revealing unauthorized access to private quarters and deliberate personal property relocation without permission, represented unprecedented boundary violation transcending previous testing toward direct governance usurpation through physical action rather than mere persuasive approaches. The calculated planning necessary implementing property relocation without authorization demonstrated concerning entitlement transcending specific celebration conflict toward fundamental governance challenge, requiring immediate response despite potential family conflict. The moment had arrived for decisive intervention, addressing both immediate boundary violation and fundamental governance. Misunderstanding increasingly evident throughout orchestrated manipulation attempts disguised beneath family celebration contexts. Rather than emotional reaction potentially escalating situation unnecessarily, I excused myself, briefly returning 10 minutes later with formal documentation folder provided by Foundation Legal Counsel following Wellington attorney inquiry several months earlier. Descending main staircase where approximately 40 Wellington family members and business associates had gathered in grand entrance hall awaiting formal celebration commencement, I positioned myself on central landing, creating perfect visibility while maintaining appropriate presence, ensuring clear communication, despite potential reaction, given unprecedented disclosure, addressing both immediate boundary violation and fundamental governance reality increasingly necessary given persistent misunderstanding regarding property ownership, despite consistent policy application throughout preceding conflicts. I appreciate everyone joining what Victoria has described as Wellington family celebration, though proper context seems necessary given apparent misunderstanding regarding governance arrangements. I began with measured tone, balancing clarity. Against unnecessary confrontation despite orchestrated violation clearly proceeding, despite consistent boundary communication. This documentation provided by Foundation Legal Counsel following recent Wellington attorney inquiry establishes clear ownership parameters addressing persistent confusion regarding property access, despite consistent policy application throughout preceding interactions. The hushed silence spreading throughout gathered guests created perfect acoustic environment, ensuring clear communication, despite challenging circumstances created through orchestrated violation proceeding, despite consistent boundary maintenance, throughout preceding conflicts. Victoria's expression shifted from confident authority toward growing concern as folder contents became increasingly evident through subsequent explanation, addressing both immediate boundary violation and fundamental governance misunderstanding. The Westfield Manor Trust, established 1991, explicitly places property ownership exclusively with Preservation Foundation, maintaining governance independence regardless of trustee residential arrangements established through formal board processes. I explained with professional clarity, avoiding unnecessary personalization, despite orchestrated violation clearly proceeding, despite consistent boundary communication. This legal structure intentionally prevents access exceptions potentially compromising historical integrity through incremental accommodation regardless of relationship connection or celebration context. Victoria's growing discomfort visible. Despite practiced social composure suggested genuine surprise at documentation directness. Despite previous attorney inquiry, presumably revealing similar information several months earlier. Her attempted interruption, suggesting private discussion preference rather than public clarification, indicated tactical retreat given unexpected resistance despite orchestrated pressure creating governance challenge through accumulated social presence rather than direct confrontation with consistently maintained policies. Perhaps we should discuss specific arrangements privately addressing both celebration needs and governance requirements, regardless of technical documentation interpretation, potentially creating unnecessary complication despite reasonable family accommodation, she suggested with strained casualness, masking evident frustration given unexpected resistance, despite sophisticated approach creating implied pressure through physical presence, rather than direct policy violation potentially triggering immediate security response. This attempted diversion, positioning governance reality as technical interpretation rather than fundamental structure, demonstrated sophisticated manipulation, attempting leverage against documentation clarity despite formal legal analysis. Establishing property ownership parameters, transcending trustee residence designation through comprehensive foundation governance, regardless of family connection or celebration context. The characterization suggesting unnecessary complication rather than fundamental protection revealed concerning perspective regarding preservation mission, despite consistent communication, clarifying governance reality throughout preceding conflicts. The documentation clarity leaves no room for interpretation regarding property ownership or access parameters, regardless of trustee residential arrangements established through formal board processes. I responded with professional composure, avoiding unnecessary personalization despite orchestrated violation, clearly proceeding, despite consistent boundary communication. The Westfield Manor Trust, established 1991, explicitly designates property ownership exclusively with Preservation Foundation, maintaining governance independence regardless of relationship connection or celebration context. The continuing silence throughout gathered guests suggested growing awareness regarding orchestrated manipulation, placing them in potentially embarrassing situation through deliberate misrepresentation regarding manor availability. Despite consistent policy communication, throughout preceding interactions, several Wellington business associates exchanged concerned glances indicating professional reputation, consideration, transcending immediate celebration context, given potential association with governance violation attempt, regardless of specific awareness regarding orchestrated manipulation proceeding despite consistent boundary maintenance throughout preceding conflicts. Most significantly, this legal documentation confirms I am not merely resident trustee, but actually donated property establishing foundation originally, maintaining governance oversight, ensuring preservation mission protecting historical significance, beyond contemporary social utility, regardless of potential benefit or relationship connection. I continued with calm clarity, addressing fundamental misunderstanding, increasingly evident throughout orchestrated manipulation attempts, disguised beneath family celebration contexts. My trustee role exists through deliberate wealth transfer creating preservation mission, rather than employment arrangement potentially creating confusion regarding governance authority, despite consistent policy application throughout proceeding. Interactions. Victoria's visible shock at this unprecedented disclosure created momentary speechlessness, suggesting genuine surprise, despite previous documentation access through Wellington attorney inquiry, presumably revealing similar information. Several months earlier, her carefully maintained social composure momentarily fractured, revealing authentic reaction, transcending tactical approach given unexpected resistance, despite sophisticated strategy development throughout preceding conflicts. The revelation created perfect silence throughout Grand Entrance Hall as Wellington family members and business associates processed unexpected governance clarity, addressing both immediate boundary violation and fundamental misunderstanding regarding property ownership. Despite consistent policy application throughout preceding conflicts, this critical moment, property owner rather than mere trustee disclosure, addressed persistent entitlement perspective regarding access parameters, transcending specific celebration conflict toward comprehensive governance, understanding increasingly necessary given orchestrated manipulation attempts disguised beneath family celebration contexts. Bradford Sr.'s supportive nod suggested values, alignment, transcending immediate celebration conflict, while addressing fundamental governance reality increasingly necessary, given persistent boundary testing throughout preceding conflicts, despite consistent policy application protecting Manor's historical significance beyond contemporary social utility. His measured approach toward main entrance indicating departure preference rather than continuing orchestrated violation demonstrated sophisticated understanding, transcending immediate convenience toward fundamental preservation mission, regardless of specific celebration context. Perhaps alternative venue represents appropriate solution respecting both celebration importance and preservation necessity regardless of specific location preference. He suggested with quiet certainty, creating graceful retreat opportunity, regardless of previous orchestrated violation planning proceeding, despite consistent boundary communication throughout preceding conflicts. The Wellington gathering deserves setting specifically designed accommodating elegant celebrations without governance conflicts limiting enjoyment through necessary policy application, regardless of relationship connection. This constructive alternative, addressing legitimate celebration needs while maintaining appropriate governance boundaries, created resolution opportunity regardless of previous orchestrated manipulation, attempting leverage against preservation. Mission through various approaches, ranging from relationship obligation to institutional threat. Despite consistent boundary maintenance protecting Manor's historical significance beyond contemporary social utility. As Wellington family members and business associates quietly departed following Bradford Sr.'s tactful suggestion, creating graceful retreat regardless of previous orchestrated violation planning, Victoria remained momentarily behind, her expression combining shock with embarrassment, given unprecedented disclosure addressing both immediate boundary violation and fundamental governance. Misunderstanding increasingly evident throughout orchestrated manipulation attempts disguised beneath family celebration contexts. You could have told us you owned the property outright rather than creating unnecessary complications regarding governance technicalities versus family accommodations, she stated with strained composure, masking evident frustration given comprehensive strategy failure, despite sophisticated approach development throughout preceding conflicts. This information would have prevented misunderstanding regarding access parameters, despite reasonable expectation, considering relationship connection, regardless of specific celebration context. This characterization, positioning ownership disclosure as withheld information rather than unnecessary clarification given consistent policy application, regardless of specific governance structure, demonstrated persistent perspective fundamentally. Misunderstanding preservation mission despite numerous previous explanations regarding governance reality transcending family connection or celebration context. The implied criticism suggesting deliberate complication rather than appropriate boundary maintenance revealed concerning entitlement perspective regarding property access, fundamentally inconsistent with preservation mission, regardless of ownership arrangement or relationship connection. Ownership information wasn't relevant given consistent policy application, protecting preservation mission regardless of specific governance structure. I responded with professional clarity, avoiding unnecessary personalization despite evident frustration given comprehensive strategy failure. Despite sophisticated approach development throughout preceding conflicts, the Foundation governance prevents access exceptions potentially compromising historical integrity through incremental accommodation, regardless of specific ownership arrangement or relationship connection, given fundamental preservation purpose. Transcending contemporary social utility regardless of potential benefit or celebration context. Victoria's departure without substantive response maintained minimal courtesy, while body language revealed profound recalibration. Necessity given unprecedented disclosure, fundamentally challenging entitlement perspective regarding property access. Despite consistent policy application throughout preceding conflicts, her brief farewell suggested strategy abandonment rather than tactical retreat. Given comprehensive governance reality clarification, addressing both immediate boundary violation and fundamental misunderstanding regarding property ownership increasingly evident throughout orchestrated manipulation attempts disguised beneath family celebration contexts. While standing alone in Grand Entrance Hall following Wellington departure, creating unexpected resolution despite orchestrated violation planning. Proceeding against consistent boundary communication throughout preceding conflicts, I reflected on journey bringing me from Riverbrook paper mill worker's daughter to estate owner establishing preservation foundation, protecting historical significance beyond contemporary social utility, regardless of relationship connection or celebration context. This extraordinary transformation, built through consistent application of principles learned at parents' kitchen table regardless of changing external circumstances, demonstrated fundamental lesson regarding disciplined resource management, creating possibilities seemingly impossible when viewing current limitations rather than future potential. Regardless of starting position or external expectations, limiting achievement through artificial constraints, potentially preventing opportunity, recognition beyond immediate circumstance, regardless of specific context or relationship connection. Some lessons about respecting elders can't be taught with gentle reminders alone. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.